Good evening, Bahamas. Coming up tonight on our news.
In marking their first year in office, the finance minister clears up how much money the Minnis administration actually borrowed.
Outspoken Pine Ridge MP Frederick McAlpine weighs in on his party's first year in office.
Operation Sovereign Bahamas took to the streets today to protest a long list of issues.
Our news is brought to you by Alive.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. I'm Christina Dragovich. Topping news tonight, as the Minnis administration prepares to celebrate the anniversary of its first year in office, cabinet ministers are preparing to give an account for their performance thus far. But one of them jumped the gun, explaining there's a lot more work to be done in the Ministry of Finance. But he says when it comes to the over $1 billion borrowed so far, every dollar was necessary. Here's Kyle Joaquin.
One thing the Minnis administration has taken repeated hits for during this first year in office is the amount of borrowing. Today, in speaking with the finance minister, he said it was something that he has to clear up.
So in reality, if you wanted to grade me, it's $322 million that I would have borrowed.
Finance Minister Peter Turnquest is defending the amount of money the government has borrowed since its huge election victory last year. Over $1.4 billion has been borrowed by the Minnis administration 1 year in. However, Turnquest said there's a misunderstanding that members of the opposition seem to be taking advantage of.
I've seen these numbers that have been floating around, 1.4 billion and all the rest of it. So the reality is that 750 million of that was a bond offering, which was to repay existing loans, not new money, just to term out or to pay off loans that were already outstanding.
Noting that because government doesn't have that kind of cash sitting around, the finance minister said the government had to refinance that loan. So let's do the math. According to Turnquest, there's the over $1.4 billion borrowed since the government took office. $750 million of that was for the bond offering, leaving $650 million. And according to Turnquest, there's an explanation for $400 million of that as well as the other $323 million.
$400 million of that was to pay loan or bills that we inherited from the previous government, the bills that they left in place that had no provision to pay. Right. And then we had $322 million, which was the projected deficit for this current year.
Overall, when it comes to finances and government's performance, Turnquest says he's one of those people who are never satisfied, especially when it comes to the country's GFS deficit.
There's no hiding the fact that our deficit is now at 57%, I think it is, to GDP, approaching $8 billion. That is unsustainable. Our deficit, annual deficit, which this year is going to be around $322 million, which is what we projected. Obviously, that is unsustainable. We have to bring that down.
Then there's job creation and more investments needed to accelerate that process. But they've only wrapped up year 1 of 5, he said, and a fix to these problems won't come overnight.
It's going to require us to be disciplined, to be patient, to be focused on what we're trying to accomplish in the long term. And that is, again, to bring this debt down, to bring our recurrent deficit down to a manageable number, preferably lower than our growth rate. But there's going to be a period of time before we can get there.
For our news, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
Disappointing is how outspoken MP for Pine Ridge, Frederick McAlpine, is describing his party's first year in office. The F&M MP, who's no stranger to criticizing his own party, says the Minnis administration is perpetuating the perception that the party is not for the ordinary man, but for the white, light, rich, and famous. Jasmine Brown has more in this report.
McAlpine says while the party campaigned on the promise, it's the people's time, he says their first year in office definitely did not reflect that.
The problem with our government, successive and now, when I talk about it, I'm talking about the Free National Movement government. There is a perception out there that every time we come to power, we are either for the white, the light, the rich, and the famous, or the well-connected. We must change that and let people know that we are government for the people, of the people, and by the people, all the people.
McAlpine weighed in on the F&M's performance over the past year as the party prepares to celebrate the one-year anniversary of its election win on Thursday. He says while the F&M promised it was the people's time, he believes the people are no longer buying that line.
You can't get in on the backs of the common men and women in this country and then at the end of the day turn around and seem to be, not necessarily the case, but seem to be, the perception seemed to be pandering to a special interest group. Because that is how the PLP continues to beat us every time. Even if they don't do it, at least they're good at pretending they're for the people, as opposed to one group who totally basically ignore the people once in and use those people as a stepping stone to get to where they're at.
McAlpine's comments come 2 days after Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis cautioned members of the F&M on Sunday against attacking the government in the media and called on the party to unite. While Minnis did not single out McAlpine, the Pine Ridge MP has been one of the few F&M MPs who have not been shy about criticizing the government. The Pine Ridge MP said he doesn't regret criticizing the Minnis administration, adding that he will continue to be critical on issues where he sees fit. As for his thoughts about how the country has been run by this administration since May 2017,
we need to improve. There's always room for improvement. We can do a little bit more than what we've done. We have to, see, the bottom line is we claim to be the people's government. We must therefore push the people's agenda. And oftentimes when we come to this place, we tend to push what seems to be important to the politician isn't always important to the people. If it's important to the people, we should then make it our agenda.
However, McAlpine insists all is not lost for the party, noting there is time for the F&M government to get back on track. In fact, he says there have been some bright spots during this administration's first year in office.
We have to give the party credit for the fact that murders are down. That is one of the things that I'm extremely proud about. Also, the fact that the economy has grown, as the Prime Minister stated, by 1.4%.
Ministers of the Minnis cabinet are expected to outline the government's accomplishments on Thursday night during an event at F&M headquarters. Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Members of Parliament began debate on the Affordable Homes Act 2018 in the House of Assembly this morning. Contributing to the debate was Elizabeth MP Dr. Dwayne Sands, who underscored the need for affordable housing by highlighting statistics showing just how many Bahamians cannot afford homes across the country.
The IDB reported in 2016 that 21% of Bahamian households were so strapped, so poor, that they could not afford what was called affordable housing, and that the most they could afford was $18,000 for a home. At that time, the houses being built were between $150,000 and $160,000.
Sands, who served as chairman of the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation under the last Ingram administration, says during his tenure it became increasingly clear that affordable housing is a critical issue for everyday Bahamians. He also insisted that under the former Christie administration, the government failed to meet its own goal of building more than 100 affordable homes.
The Ministry of Housing would have drawn down on a loan from the National Insurance Board $10 million. It was anticipated that that would contribute to this aggressive housing campaign. Mr. Speaker, what we find is that no more than 55 homes were constructed. And if you do the arithmetic, $10 million divided by 55 is $181,000 per home.
Anglerston MP Glenys Hanna Martin hit out at the stats provided by Sands, saying his numbers had nothing to do with the debate.
The statistics that you speak of relate nothing to do with anything that has been done by this administration. It's to do with certain measures that were taken prior to this administration. And in fact, when the Minister of Finance gave his budget communication, when you were in office 3 weeks or whatever it was, he was able to show in that, demonstrate that the number of non-performing mortgages had significantly diminished. And it has nothing to do with anything. I mean, I know you all look in the mirror and think you are great and wonderful and fantastic, and just because you're here, everything's just so wonderful. But there's a real world, and sometimes it takes hard work. It has to make hard decisions.
Well, Member of Parliament for Central and South Andros Picewell Forbes is slamming the Minnis administration's over-the-hill white paper. Forbes says those living in struggling communities have suffered for too long and want to see action, not hear excessive talking.
There's been much chatter this morning about over the hill, or what we call heritage communities. Ain't no more time for talk or build some houses over the hill. People ain't want to hear no more talking right now, Mr. Speaker. We want to help, our people want to be empowered in a meaningful way. Mr. Speaker, the people over the hill once again don't want no more white paper. They don't want no more green paper. They want real home ownership, especially in the inner city or the heritage communities of this country.
The white paper was tabled in the House of Assembly last month. Bain and Grantstown and Centerville will become the first empowerment zone in the Bahamas. Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis has said the incentives outlined will apply to residential properties, commercial and industrial undertakings, and a turnover of $5 million and all enterprises whose primary income comes from gaming or the sale of alcohol. The Minnis administration rode into Parliament last May saying it's the people's time. Well, on the eve of that anniversary of that historic win, a group of protesters stood in Parliament Square today saying they're not sure their time has truly come. From the OBAN deal to the treatment of farmers, the absence of a Freedom of Information Act, and the proposed importation of Haitian goods, protesters say they're not satisfied with what's happening in the country. Our Jillian Gray reports.
Operation Sovereign Bahamas took to the streets this morning protesting the lack of transparency they say they've seen within the first year of the Minnis administration.
No WTO! No WTO! No WTO!
The group had a long list of issues. Chief among them was the Oban Energy's deal.
East Grand Bahama is the second largest water supply for the Bahamas. We're going to put Oban on top of it. East Grand Bahama is the second largest Coppice area. We're going to put Oban in the middle of it. East Grand Bahama is the second largest mangrove in the whole Western Hemisphere. The whole United States don't have as much as East Grand Bahama. We're going to put Oban in the middle of it.
On the eve of the anniversary of the Minnis administration's landslide win, Director of Operation Sovereign Bahamas Adrian Francis said he would give Dr. Minnis a failing grade.
If you can tell the Commodore, tell us better, learn how to navigate, show us how the hell you navigate my country. Really? How you navigate my country. You look like you running this underground. You look like the Titanic waiting to happen.
Lamenting the fact that there has still been no environmental impact assessment done for the $5.5 million Oban oil refinery deal, a cancer survivor from Grand Bahama talked about the devastation that his community has experienced.
How can you have an industrial sector without environmental impact studies? Not just that, how come you have no real policing of that area?
Colebrook called for the Minister of Grand Bahama to stand against the Oban deal. Pine Ridge MP Frederick McAlpine agreed with the protesters and said he is against the Oban deal.
Grand Bahama don't need 50 jobs or 100 jobs. Grand Bahama needs an economic infusion and not at the expense of destroying the lives of people. So don't tell me, well, the Oban is an economic infusion. Yeah, but not at the expense of destroying people's lives. So we don't need just jobs. We need jobs that's going to get at least 2,000 to 3,000 people to work.
The Pine Ridge MP encouraged protesters to continue to speak up.
You have a right to protest, and you have a right to hold your government accountable and transparent. And we should have no problem, the Free National Movement should have no problem with nobody protesting, because after all, they are people, and it's the people's time.
The organization plans to have several town hall meetings and will formally submit their concerns to the government on Friday. Reporting for Our News, I'm Jillian Gray.
Still to come on Our News, web shops launch their responsible gaming program. That and more when Our News returns.